Hello, everyone. I am Alper Markov, and this is Concepts and Legends. And today we have a very exciting interview with MTG artist Steven Belledin. So, without any further ado, let's get to the interview.
Well, thank you very much for doing this today. I appreciate it. I'll try to make it as quick and
Well,
painless as possible.
no worries. I'm not under pressure. I'm done for the year as far as the deadlines go. So it's just personal work and catching up on odds and ends. So
And speaking of, and I had other questions, but behind you, what is that is sitting behind you right now?
it's a personal piece. I'm like most of the way through. I kind of just started doing pretty major revisions on it yesterday. But it's just, personal piece that, yeah.
When you do personal pieces, what's the impetus behind them?
Honestly, to sort of, I mean, it's mostly just getting into my own interests. Like, client work is great and everything, but it doesn't always reflect what I want to paint, and how I want to express myself. So that's the, that's what I use my personal work for, is getting back to like, Magic especially is very style guide driven, and as a result, like a lot of design work, a lot of design sensibilities aren't my own. I'm imitating other people's work. And
Right.
so, getting the opportunity, or giving myself the opportunity to do more stuff that's mine, and it gets back to what I really like about fantasy and, imaginative realism and stuff. That's primarily what
What
what it's for.
like one of the things that I read in your blog that I found really interesting, and I didn't know this about the MTG artists in general, is that you said that Wizards of the Coast doesn't always use the art for what it's commissioned for. Like it could use a piece for whatever piece they deem worthy, right?
Generally speaking, yeah. I mean, I would say probably 99% of the time, like when you're given an assignment, or when a magic artist is given an assignment, it becomes, it's basically a one for one. Like they have a card that they're play testing behind the scenes that this is specifically, assigned for. But every once in a while, like a card will get killed. I mean, they'll still buy the art and everything, and they still own the art, but then it'll come out, years later, as something completely different.
Has there
Um,
been anything of yours that, I mean, I don't know if you're allowed to say it or not, but has there been any pieces that have shown up in different spaces that you didn't know they were going to?
yeah, I think the biggest example, or the most recent example, I guess, would be, oh gosh, what was it even called? Uh, it's I'm terrible with my own titles. I can
Right.
just tell you that off the bat, because we're given temp titles when
Uh-huh.
we get the assignments, and then they're switched usually to other card titles. And so, like, there's just all, like, I have an art ID number floating around in my head, and a temporary title and a final title. So, like, it's just this mash of information.
What is the image?
What is it?
Just describe the image.
It's
Maybe
Great Oak. I think it's Great Oak Guardian, is what
okay.
it ended up being called. Um, and that was originally alternate art for, I don't even know what the actual card was, but Matt Stewart ended up doing the art for it. And it's a very similar, like, tree with a large stone in its hand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think essentially they were going to do another version of that card with alt art, and for whatever reason they decided against doing that, and it just sat around in a computer folder for years, and then suddenly they found a place for it, and out it came. And I think as of this recording, I think I only have one piece that dates as far back as the first Innistrad, that has never been published. So,
Really?
like, it may pop up someday. It may not be. It may not. Who knows? It's just out there floating, and maybe they'll use it, or maybe it'll just sit there,
I
invisible to all forever.
I wouldn't be. I doubt that, because you seem like somebody who would be in the running for maybe a secret layer coming up. If I were to be a gambling man, that would be my gamble. But I also, at the same time, I was kind of like a little bit bummed, because I had this whole fantasy in my mind that Duress was card that had no initial connection to what it was, and I was like, well, maybe, you know, I was off on that one. I was like, my guess was Duress, but I was off. So
Yeah, Duress is, as I recall, was specifically commissioned for Duress, because that's not the original art to that card, as
no,
so
it's not, but yours is better.
I think it's probably the most printed version of that card, though.
It's super iconic, and it kind of goes against what some of your blogs are saying, because you know, you talked about how only the popular pieces are popular, and Duress is sort of an example of one of the popular unpopular cards. Like it keeps showing up, and it's useful in standard, that it's now just something that you expect in every rotation, and that elfin girl is just sort of you know, like you recognize that.
Yeah, forever screaming.
Right. Like, and did you, I saw somebody talked about in the Avengers that there was a scene in it that directly imitated Duress, where I forget Benedict Cumberbatch's character, but all these things are coming out his face, and somebody wrote online that
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really considered that.
I was like, yeah, they totally jacked that. That's it's I mean, you know, like, how many times can like wiry things come pointing at someone's face? It's not that common.
I guess, I don't know. I honestly couldn't say, but you know, if somebody thought of my piece, I'm flattered. But I mean, I also wouldn't be surprised if it was just, you know, parallel creative thinking. So
maybe, but I mean, at the same time, I would be less surprised if people who worked on those movies didn't play Magic the Gathering, because that seems like it would be a highly likely situation.
You know, it's actually been surprising over the years finding out how like pervasive Magic actually is, and like where it pops up. And you know, Dungeons and Dragons is the same way. I mean, the number of like famous people who grew up playing and still play Dungeons and Dragons blows my mind.
It's insanely
and I'm
popular.
sure the truth. Yeah, and I'm sure the same is true of Magic. It's you know.
Now,
so
a question I want to ask about A Moment of Triumph. Was it intentional to, because I had always, you know, I played it more on Arena. I hadn't gotten into Magic until Modern Horizons. So Exilon was before my time. And I never saw the Moment of Triumph in sort of like its full sized. So I just assumed from a distance, it looked like the side figure of a vampire with their sword out. Was it intentional to make the horse and the rider of the horse resemble a silhouette of a person?
No. You got me. I never noticed. Now it was definitely intended to just be you know, vampire on a giant white horse, and then, you know, like, because that and Moment of
Craving.
No, yeah, moment of Craving are sort of like a two panel story essentially.
Right.
And so, you know, that's the only like connective tissue that was, you know, built into the piece, was knowing that it had to, you know, reference back down the road.
Yeah, no, because I saw that and I was like, oh wow, that's a horse, a person riding on the horse, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. It sort of is like a Dali kind of looking thing. At least that's what I see when I look into it. I mean, am I crazy?
Interesting. I mean, I'm not going to tell you you're crazy, because, you know, we see what we see. Like, you know, it wasn't planned, and I'm not sure I see it, but, you know, I'm not going to, you know.
I'm going to post with the video. I'm going to do like a little hand doodle thing. I'll be like, see, I'm not, yeah. So,
oh no, I'm, you know, I'm going to have to, as soon as you know, we hang up here, I'm going to go look, because I'm genuinely curious, because it's not something, you know, it's right. Weird. You get, you know, because I painted it and everything, I'm so close to it. Maybe right. I don't see some of the stuff other people do. So yeah.
Yeah. So Tori Amos, when I interviewed her, you know, she talks about how when you release art to the public, it becomes not yours anymore. It becomes other people's, and people have to come up and tell you that their interpretation is right and your interpretation is wrong. And you have to be open to that.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, I agree with that sentiment, like, wholeheartedly. That, I mean, first and foremost, you know, the art is Wizards of the Coast, you know, but I mean, and it's legally, proliferated, yes, but proliferated all throughout the world. And, you know, everybody brings to any given image the baggage and their experiences and everything, their cultural biases, everything that they've lived, ends up influencing what they see and how they interpret something. So I think that just makes art richer. Like, I'm not going to tell anybody what they think they should think of, interpret anything of mine. I mean, because half of it is pretty obvious. It's like, oh, that's Dragon. But the stuff that's a little bit more abstract, and certainly my personal work, like, people can take from it what they want. Like, as long as it reaches them on some level, that's what matters to me most.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm curious to know, early in your career, you talked about hitting sort of a proverbial brick wall when you went to New York City to pursue art originally. What happened when you described that?
Well, I went to college in New York, and I stayed on after I graduated, because it's at least I assume, I guess it's fair to say it's still, one of the biggest, it's like the center of the publishing world,
Yeah.
And so I was hoping to get into doing, book covers and editorial work and that kind of thing, because that's kind of what I was trained to do more than anything else. And it didn't work out. Like, they had these days, like, sometimes you could get a hold of art directors, but 90% of the time you only got voicemail, so you never really got to talk to them directly. And then when you did talk to them, there was some, I think honestly part of it is that my work was half-baked. Like, I don't think I was quite ready yet. The other part of it was, it's a very competitive field, and it's really hard to get your foot in the door, unless your work is head and shoulders above everybody around you. And mine just wasn't. So like, so I found it difficult even finding, like, really small jobs. Like, there's this guy that used to be the art director for the book review section of the New York Times.
Okay.
Stephen Heller is his name. He's still around as far as more. And he was kind enough to interview me, look at my portfolio and stuff. And he was, at least at the time, really famous for giving people their first shot, out of school and stuff. And I took my stuff into him, and it was great. It was like 7 a.m. I was like bleary eyed, and who wants to be up that early? Personally, I don't anyway, and let alone having my work scrutinized.
That's rough.
But he was very kind. He was very thorough. He picked my portfolio apart, like, very astutely. And he really liked, in the end, my concept, the concepts behind my work, but he didn't like the delivery. He didn't feel like I technically was ready. And he was probably, he was right. And so I ended up, having to get a day job to support myself. And, I did a bunch of different things, but I eventually landed working at a public relations company, of all things. And then, eventually I found fantasy art.
What was the moment where you sort of got your foot in the door? Because there had to be that one job that was really the catalyst.
Sort of, yeah. So one of the guys I went to college with, he had every intention of doing fantasy art coming out of school. Like, that's what he wanted to do, which was kind of extraordinary, because, like, fantasy art really wasn't verboten or anything like that. It wasn't really even looked down upon, but none of my professors did it. So they really couldn't, like, teach to it. And they would do their best, and they would, hook you up with people that, might be able to help you out. But in general, that wasn't their experience. It was hard to, like, prepare people for that.
It's sort of like, I'm sorry. It's a,
no, he went full bore. He's like, I'm doing this. And immediately out of the gate, he started getting work for White Wolf and, AEG, working on, like, Legend of the Five Rings card game and that kind of thing. And I got nothing. And eventually he was just like, hey, you know, like you should put together some fantasy stuff too. Like, I think you could, you know, you could get work. And I was, you know, I mean, I had a day job, but I didn't want to, you know, I'd love to be paid to paint anything, even if it wasn't full time. It was, you know, so the first job I ever did was I finally like put enough, you know, 3 or 4 samples together and I sent it out to a couple different companies. And the first job I ever did was for Fantasy Flight Games, I think. And yeah, it was Fantasy Flight Games. It was all at $75, which, you know, illustrators across the board will always tell you don't settle for these, you know, really low paying jobs and that kind of thing. But let me tell you, it was all the work I could get at the time. It was a full color piece and they never printed it. And probably for the best. It was a bad experience all around. That being said, it was like everything that could have gone wrong on a job went wrong on that job. And it kind of got me over psychologically a lot of the barriers I had in my head. Like I didn't hesitate after that. Like I knew, okay, well, this company hired me. If I you know, improve the work and I keep at it, I know that the next company will hire me, and then the next company will hire me. And so eventually I got work with AEG, working on, I think they had a card game that used to be called Warlord or something to that effect. Mm-hmm. And then Legend of the Five Rings. And I did a bunch of stuff for them. And that it was basically like getting paid to create a new portfolio. And then I took the artwork that I did for them and I showed it to a company called Sabertooth Games, who used to exist, and they used to make a card game for Warhammer.
Right.
And I got a bunch of work from them, and then I used that work to get my foot in the door at Dungeons and Dragons.
And there you go, yeah.
And then from D&D, it was off to the races. And I did a ton of D&D work. It was a lot. I learned so much doing that stuff.
That's great, because that explains sort of how your artwork was kind of like you hit the ground running. Like there isn't, in my opinion, anything that I look at from your Magic artwork that I say, oh, this is somebody finding their voice.
Oh, bless you. Because let me tell you, there's a lot of work that I'm like, ooh, I wish I could do that all over again. I wish I could take it back. But
you are hypercritical of yourself. I noticed that in the blog. I was like, damn, he is just like tearing himself down. I get it. It's what makes you good. But I'm also like, I've never heard anybody say anything like a surgical extraction when you were like, it might be boring to some people. I'm like, boring to nobody ever. And it'll be like, if you find that boring, I'd be like, then it's because you have a simple mind. That would be what I would say.
I think people are attracted to different kind of imagery, and I think there are absolutely people out there who would look at surgical extraction, and because it lacks action, because it lacks an overt story, it lacks dynamism. I think.
You think
in
so?
A lot of
really?
respects. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it is probably the most appealing image personally that I've ever done for Magic. Like it is the closest thing that I can ever think of that, you know, where my commercial work and my personal work sort of like began to blur. Like that is the closest it ever got. But I know, I'm sure there are people who look at it and just like, meh. And that's totally cool. I mean, that's completely legitimate. You know, I mean, like I said, you know, we bring our biases and we bring our, you know, interests and, you know, what we love, what we hate to every image we see. So, you know, it makes total sense to me that there's people who are like, meh. But to me, that was me firing on all cylinders, where it was just like laser focus and it like most of my Magic work is chasing that dragon. Mm-hmm. You know, it is trying to find that mental space again. And you know, some pieces are really hard to get there. Some pieces I never get there. And those pieces I tend to be the most critical about, because it's, you know, they're slogs. You know, they're very difficult for me.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, you'd mentioned that it was Citadel Siege was a tough one for you to get through.
it was, yeah. That was a really hard fought piece, and a lot of it. I mean, I have a really bad habit um, that causes me a lot of grief. In all reality, but I mean, like so many illustrators, I know how to fix it, but I'm never going to fix it. And that is basically like that piece is a really excellent example where I didn't fully develop the sketch. Like the sketch indicates what the finished piece is going to be, but it doesn't quite solve all of the problems. And the reason for that is that personally, I get bored easily. And if I solve all of the problems at the sketch phase, painting it is just the most boring thing in the world. Like I need to solve problems. I need to um, find and exploit happy accidents, whenever I'm doing anything, like, because that process is interesting to me. The process of, refinement and sussing out what's wrong with a piece and correcting it and everything, like that's really interesting to me. If it's just taking the sketch and just repainting the sketch, that's nosebleed boring to me.
Is that why you think
Um,
you stick to prefer oil over computer art?
well, I mean, I think digital work would afford me a very similar amount of flexibility. The difference is that what I'd be much more prone to do if I was working digitally was I would just take the sketch and just refine the sketch till it was finished. Whereas I have to start all over again with oils. I mean, the reality is my choice of oils is largely based on the fact that, like, mentally I'm kind of a dinosaur.
A
I
Luddite.
really, yeah, I mean, I love artifacts. I love physical things. Um, and, like, there's a part of me that dreads, like, going to a museum someday and seeing just monitors on the wall.
Yeah,
Um,
that's awful.
like, I mean, I don't know that it's awful per se, but
But
it's
just
not
monitors? I mean,
appealing to me.
but I mean that sounds like it's. I mean, you go to a museum and for a monitor, I mean, like that's okay. I never went to it, I never saw it, I can't comment on it, but I'm gonna. The Salvador Dali Museum did a
Yeah.
whole like 3D thing with Salvador Dali, and I'm thinking no bells and whistles are needed for his stuff. I've seen his stuff in the actual, like, in the museum as it is, and it doesn't
Mhm.
require any accentuation or monitors, and I feel like a museum with monitors would be abysmal.
I mean, it would be a lot cheaper to change what's on the walls.
That's a
Um,
positive.
yeah, I mean, honestly, I mean, I don't think there's any real threat to that, but like, I love, going into a museum and I love the smell, the smells of, museums, and I love the smell of oil painting. I love, like, the tactile, like, painting and physical media, like, involves more than just my eyes and my hand. It's tactile, it's physical, it's, my sense of smell, my, um like, all of it is activated, and it feels much more alive to me than working digitally. And I've done a lot of, like, concept art and stuff digitally, and I've done even finished illustrations digitally, and it's fine. Like, I understand the appeal. I genuinely do, especially, like, if somebody asks you to change anything. Boy, is it so much easier to do digitally.
Right.
But um, but for me, like, if I'm going to continue to make art, like, if Wizards tomorrow mandated that everything needs to be digital, I would just stop working for Wizards. They would, I don't believe for a minute they would ever do such a thing. I'm
No,
just saying, like,
I don't think that that's going to happen for either
uh,
you. Not, I mean, they're not going to stop working with you, nor are they going to go digital, because
yeah.
they really are sort of the patrons for a lot of you guys. And, like, they're sort of, I know that in a sense, I mean, they are not patrons in the classical sense, but they give you guys, these very talented artists, a chance to shine in a world that's not that easy to do it in.
Well, and the interesting thing about it is that, I mean, they've been I mean, back in the day, it used to be all traditional, and I mean, as time has gone on, it's been a, you know, ebb and flow in terms of the amount of people working traditionally versus the amount of working digitally, and some even do hybrids of the two, and it's very fascinating. Like I can't fault anybody for solving the problem with whatever media they see fit. I think it's a very personal issue, and sometimes it's just a very practical issue. I mean, some folks live in a place that can't accommodate an easel, you know, but can accommodate a laptop. Some folks just don't want harsh chemicals in their houses. I can't blame them for that. So, like, you know, everybody's got to make the choices that they make, and I think, you know, I love what you know, the resulting images, and I'm really happy that Wizards continues to see value in both traditional and digital media, and you know, we as artists in general, and you know, and it's exciting to see, you know, even more diverse aesthetics coming in, especially recently, and like
with the variants, like on the card
like
variants. Yeah.
And you know, seeing people like Wiley Becker, you know, do what she does and get to do it for Magic, and like, you know, I mean, her drawings make my nose bleed. I don't even know how she like thinks. It's so impressive to me. But you know, it's nice to see that, you know, that there's still a place for folks who do pen and ink, and you're not pen and ink, but ink and paint, and you know, watercolor and gouache and the whole nine yards. And it's like, it's kind of a relief, frankly, because, you know, I think especially in editorial, it's getting harder and harder, and, you know,
Right. Yeah.
even book cover, it probably is too, just because of, you know, the amount of changes, the amount of it, you know.
And it would pit you guys against each other if they said, all right, we're only doing this, we're only doing that. That would sort of make the community sort of divisive, I think.
I don't know. I mean, as long as they have enough space for everybody, it would be less of that. It's just, you know,
But if they
my
all went,
choice of
went
medium
all
is,
digital or all oil versus, you know what I'm saying, versus integrating both of them.
well, I mean, I like I said, I think if the amount of work available didn't change, it wouldn't be that, you know, there wouldn't be any cutthroat shenanigans or anything like that. But I mean, I think it just would be a barrier to a lot of people, because I think I'm not the only person who finds satisfaction in doing work traditionally, and I think that works inversely, that there are people who find great satisfaction working digitally too. So I think, you know, thank goodness that there's still a place for both of us.
Has there been a piece of yours that you maybe have learned to respect more over the years that you maybe were initially more critical of?
Oh, that's a good question. Huh.
I mean, is that something that can happen?
I mean, you know, the thing is like, it's really weird because, like, you know, there's a temptation to go towards these like giving birth analogies and that kind of thing, which I don't ever want to like belittle. Like, I don't personally want to ever equate giving birth and creating a piece of art. You know, like creating a piece of art, I'd imagine, is way easier than giving birth.
I mean, you know, I
but,
guess it depends on. I mean, I've met some women who are like, I mean, like if they said I could make a baby or I could do a painting, they'd be like, oh, like, you can only do that. So, not that I'm saying, but you know what I mean. Like,
yeah.
I think that there is a birth aspect to it. I think there is a sort of feminine kind of energy where you are creating something.
Yeah, I think, but like, regardless of the analogy, I think for me personally, as I create a piece, like, I'm very close to it. And it's extremely rare that by the time I finish a piece, I step back and say, I like this.
That's such a bummer. You're good.
So hear me out for a second. So what ends up happening is I take the piece that I finish after I've, like, you know, scanned, retouched, sent it off to Wizards, and it goes in a drawer. And I don't get to look at it I probably don't look at it until, you know, maybe, well, basically when it gets spoiled and released. So you're talking almost a year later.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's really when I kind of come to a final decision on whether or not I like a piece, because I get to see it with completely fresh eyes.
Right.
And I would say about 75% of the stuff that I don't like, I'll sit there and say, oh, that's not as bad as I remember it.
You
Because
dislike it less.
I dislike it less. And some of them I actually like. But the reality is I have a difficult time separating the difficulty in creating something from the thing itself. And I need that actual, separation of time to kind of, let go of certain things. Curiously, that happens a lot less with my traditional work, because with my traditional work, I only have to make myself happy the entire time. And, the assignment parameters are completely mine, and they're completely flexible. And so, like, if I don't like something, I'm completely free to change it. I'm completely free to paint something out, paint something in, change the color, change the light, change anything. Whereas, with an assignment, I'm locked in after a certain point, and I have to deliver on it. And like, and throughout the entire process, like as I'm painting it, like, I'm constantly having to reassess whether or not, the focal points that I've, created, are they delivering on and answering, the problem? Are they, have I done better than what I was even asked to do? Am I just sort of living up to, is this better than the last thing I did? There are a lot of concerns that are going on in my head throughout the entire process. And sometimes, because I didn't develop something far enough down the road in a sketch, like I get into trouble and I realize, oh, this is going to be a real problem, and I have to solve, then bang my head against the wall for a while until I think of a solution to the problem, and then, off to the races again. And it's a lot of stop-start mental, gymnastics. And so, it can be a real difficult time creating work for Magic for me, especially, it depends on worlds too, because the worlds we visit, the game takes us to, are vastly different from one another. And some of them are very much in line with my own personal aesthetic and sensibilities.
Which worlds were your alien. Like, which worlds would you say are your aesthetic?
I think personally, I really, really loved the what do you call it? What's the metal world? It's
Mirrodin.
Mirrodin. I really loved Mirrodin. I really loved I even liked the Phyrexian, turn in Mirrodin. Though I have to be honest, it bums me out that like Mirrodin is now Phyrexianized.
It's so sad that
it bums me out.
Nihilistic, like Night of the Living Dead, like just like hits you in the gut. You're like, okay, yeah. Like it's like everyone.
It's a bummer, because like I'll never get to go back to painting pure Mirrodin again. Innistrad is definitely very close to my heart, not only because like it's very much in keeping with my weird horror fantasy leanings, but also because I helped, I was one of the concept artists for the original Innistrad set, and like so it was the first time I got to help birth a world for Magic, so that was a lot of fun. And so like
it's a good world.
Always feels very, thanks. I mean, I can only take some, a very small, because it's developed and exploded so much over the years since then. So it's, and it's been, put into other people's hands who treated very, very well, and, did stuff that I would never have been able to think of. So it's been really great to see what other people have done with it subsequently. And it's so cool to be, to have like designed something, and then I like actually get to paint the thing that I designed. And, like that's another place that I really like. I really liked Dominaria. I really liked, weirdly, I actually liked Kaladesh quite a bit too.
I can see why that would be as a painter, that would be a fun place to go.
Yeah, and I just realized I'm starting to name all these things that I've actually worked on, except for, Mirrodin, which I didn't work on. Like
But
as
you
far
did
as
Scars of
concept
Mirrodin,
art.
right? Oh, okay, I got you.
Yeah. But I mean, like, I mean, as an example of things that I don't, I mean, it might be even easier to give you things that I don't like. Like, I didn't really love, what's the Greek centered world?
Theros.
Theros, that's it.
And yet your piece on the Scourge of the Deep,
Oh, thank
Scourge,
you.
I mean, you'd made a
And
clay model for one of those that you used.
sort of, yeah. My maquettes are really, really rough. It actually is really funny and amazing to me, because my maquettes are like literally lumps of clay, and a lot of people for the rigmarole of articulating every scale on a fish or whatever, in clay and lighting it, faithfully, and then painting the thing. To me, it's a means to an end. I just need to see where the shadows are masked. I don't need to see the details. Like, I can fill all that out in my head for the most part, and it might not be right, but I'll try and get it to the point where it feels right, and that's enough for me. I don't personally need to go photorealistic. I don't need everything to be 100% right. Like, I like things to be a little rough around the edges personally.
I mean, do you understand that if I was even to attempt making anything out of clay, it would just you managed to have it standing upright, which to me is a feat of something to behold. It's I wish if we could do a surgical extraction with my eyeballs inside your head and you saw your work, I think you'd be like, oh, that's what other people see. Because they always say, like, with the way we are as humans, we have such a distorted view of what we actually look like that if we ran into ourselves on the street, we wouldn't actually recognize ourselves. That's how distorted our images to ourselves.
Well, weirdly though, I think artists are sort of the inverse of that, because you look at if you ask an artist to draw their default version of like a human being, probably of their same sex, chances are it'll resemble them in some way, even without looking at themselves. Like my men tend to look like me, like without even trying.
I'll have to look at that.
I see a lot of Rebecca Gay in every woman Rebecca Gay paints, right. And I don't think, I think some of that's intentional. I think some of that may be accidental, and some of it just is. I think Rebecca I think Rebecca loves her work more than I love mine. Like, I think she accepts her work more than I accept mine. So whatever comes from her, comes out of her, I think she I'm talking out of school here, obviously, but I think she has probably a better emotional relationship with work than I do.
I don't think that would be a jump to guess that.
Yeah,
but
I think everybody has a better emotional relationship with their work than I do.
It's astonishing, because you're one of the greats. Like 150 cards. People don't. Nobody I'm gonna curse. Nobody talks shit about you like online. Like you see some people and it happens, but no, I've not read it, and I've read. I read what everyone says.
Okay. There was an era where I did actually, back when Google was just a very nascent website. I had been known to Google myself every once in a while just to see what would come up. And there are two things that I read online about me and this is post working for Magic. So this is, and they're basically almost words I live by one of them is words I live by on some level.
Oh no.
The first one was in reference to my painting that I did of Sen's Heir for Lorwyn. Somebody wrote that I don't know Kithkin anatomy, which tickles me pink to no end, because
what is it?
it's a mythical creature, so who's to say what, and second of all, because I think that was one of the art director's favorite paintings of a Kithkin that anybody had done. So I was kind of like, I'm still proud of that piece. I still really like that piece. But then the other one that I really, really love, and it like, if I could ever find out who actually wrote this, I would shake their hand, because it's like, it 100% encapsulates my own view of myself. And it basically just said, all I'm saying is Steve Belledin is not the best magic artist. And
What? Oh,
my favorite part about that is that nobody had asked whether Steve Belledin is. It was just a comment that came out of the blue, and it's beautiful. And I mean that seriously, and it's great.
This is what you did. See, that's funny. Somebody says something that's just like sweeping and negative, and you're like, oh, that that makes sense. Oh man,
He gets me. I feel seen.
Oh no.
Well, I mean, and it is true. Like, I wouldn't put myself, anywhere near the top of magic artists. Like,
I would
not as long as, like, Kev exists, or Chris Ron exists, or
But you exist with them.
Goodness.
It's a
strange. I feel like I'm always bringing up the rear. Honestly, like, I don't really feel, but I mean, the benefit of feeling this way is that I'm never complacent.
Right. You'll never slack on your work, because you're always kind of like whipping yourself to do a good job.
I think it's possible to escape this. But I knew a lot of illustrators, have known a lot of illustrators over the years who kind of buy into or have bought into their own mythos.
Right.
And I think, you can buy into your mythos and still create great work, and you can still improve, but a lot of people don't, because they don't have a reason to.
Right.
And
it can stunt you too. It can sort of like
I want to be better. And I know that I could be better. And that is the thing that drives me. And it's not so much that I hate my work per se. It's that I'm disappointed that, clear steps forward weren't made in a given piece. And that's the thing that always is the disappointing aspect to a given job, is like, you want to build on your success from a previous iteration, and or at least I do. And I don't want to just spit something that's wrote out. Like, I could turn my aesthetic into a formula of some sort and crank stuff out, but I don't want to. I want everything to be unique. I want every palette to, I don't want to have like, this is my red palette, and this is my sunset palette, and this is my, dark and stormy palette. Like, I don't want to have these rote things that I go to because they work all the time. Like, I want to find what's unique about any given piece and make that thing sing. And sometimes I don't succeed.
I wonder if you could even do that. If somebody gave you an assignment and said, do 5 rote pieces of, like, say, I don't know, like a sunset or whatever, or this, like, do 5 of the lands, but make them rote as possible. I see you almost having a problem even doing rote, because you're so hypercritical, that if you were to do it on purpose, that would be a challenge for you, because you're sort of.
It would be like, I mean, the thing is like, to me, there is an inherent challenge in commercial work, especially magic, especially to express yourself in some way. Like, I know this is commercial work. Like, intellectually, I know it is commercial work. Intellectually, I know it's Wizards of the Coast's work. Like, these aren't my pieces, but I feel an obligation to bring something of myself to any given piece. And, my aesthetic is not like, say Raymond Swanland, or somebody whose work is so crystal clear in terms of their specific vision and their specific aesthetic. Mine is a lot more, my work has a lot more in common aesthetically with, very, traditional realist artists. And it's not particularly stylized. It's not particularly, so what I bring to it is, I don't know, actually. Like it, I know that I do bring something to things. I know that like I bring, I don't like weird camera angles. I like really standard, the fantasy of fantasy doesn't need bells and whistles and cool camera shots to sell it. The
That's why
fantasy of
surgical
fantasy
extraction
is
is
its
so good.
own. Thank you.
It,
And like that's certainly an intention. I think the horror, my goal with that piece, and anytime I do horror, is to try and find beauty in it in some way.
and you do. Your stuff is, I mean,
And
just can be brutal and beautiful. There's a beauty in the brutality.
I try anyway, and I think that's the thing, is like I do really I really am, when I sit down to do any given job, it really is about reinventing the wheel pretty much every time. Like what, how is this piece? Because like if I get assigned another dragon tomorrow, I have like a half dozen dragons I've painted, and it needs to be different than those. And I need to find a way to make it different from those and not, dip back into the, for me, like forget the client. I mean, maybe Wizards might be perfectly happy with basically just kind of riffing on something I've already done before, as long as it's different enough. Who cares? I don't really know. I'm not going to test those waters because it's not in me.
Right.
But for me, I need to reinvent the wheel every time. And as a result, like I think that's one of the reasons it is so difficult. Like sometimes my analogy is always about like about this is always, like peeling a label off a bottle. Like the hardest part is trying to get the edge up, like just that corner, and that's the hardest, like getting, figuring out, that initial like spark is always the hardest part of a piece. And sometimes it takes weeks to get, to figure out what a piece is to me. And it's gotten harder over the years too.
You're like you are the archetypal tortured artist. It's like you're good at what you do. You're so good at what you do, and yeah, and it's your world, your view of it is part of why you're so good. And it's like it kills me because I'm like, oh man, it's so good.
But I mean, conversely, like that's what makes the personal work so enjoyable, is because I don't have any of those pressures. But it still gets to be all mine. Like it's still,
See, I find that interesting that you don't consider the paintings yours regardless. I understand that it is not necessarily like the idea of it has a whole, team behind it, but and I get a sense that you guys are very communal and everybody is always de facto, giving others, their fair share, but the paintings really do seem to be yours in a sense that you're the one who has to bring it to the forefront. It's sort of like how a director owns a movie, or along those lines, where it is a vision that you are bringing that we
That's
see.
fair. That's fair. I mean, I think of it. It's more that it's not that I deny ownership. It's more that like they're just, to go back to the birth analogy, and more of a surrogate, for commercial work.
Gotcha.
Like, yeah, I carried it, I brought it into the world, etc., but it's not really mine.
And there's been none that are yours. There's none that you discovered.
Like I said, there's only a handful that I feel like that transcended the job.
Give me two names.
To where,
two names.
Well, surgical extraction is absolutely one.
Yes.
Overgrown Tomb, I think,
yes.
I became really personal to me. Wasteland, which was originally I think it was a prize painting done for a championship that they ended up printing as a judge's promo.
Oh wow!
Like that's another one of my favorite pieces I've ever done for Magic. Like, and it's architecture too. Like both that and Overgrown Tomb are architecture, which I hate painting, but I love those pieces. Like I mean, I can't, if they either one of those were for sale tomorrow, I wouldn't be able to afford to buy back my own pieces. But if I could, I would.
Really? And
Yeah.
and when you sell them for what you sell them for, does that not give you any sort of like release or relief from the maybe the critical side of yourself?
No, I mean, they still exist, like I have disliked a piece badly enough that I've destroyed it. And that was
Oh no.
Maelstrom
Ooh.
Nexus,
What?
which,
What part?
yeah, I took that piece. I hated it. It was like, it was probably the only piece I've ever, I was dissatisfied throughout the entire creation of the piece. And, a couple days before it was due, I like sent an image of it to the art director. I was like, man, this is just not working for me. And he's like, nah, it's fine. He's like, it's printable. Don't, relax. He's like, and he totally copped to it. He was like, maybe you weren't the right person to have given this to. And I think he was right. I think there were better people to give it to. And it sat in a drawer for a little while. And I just, every time I opened that drawer, it was there staring at me and I hated it. And so I took the piece and like, I actually used it as for a little while, I was experimenting with different oil mediums and that kind of stuff. And I used it as something to try out, oil mediums on top of, existing paint and that kind of thing. And then eventually like I tore it in half and threw it out.
Oh my goodness.
And
Ouch.
I regret nothing. Like I could have, if I had that piece today, I probably could make, a fair amount of money on it. Not oodles, but I mean, enough that I'd be satisfied with it. But I'm actually more satisfied knowing that the piece doesn't exist. Like, I mean, I'm not shy about destroying work. Like, I mean, it's impractical to do that to magic work now because, we've gone from being able to sell a magic painting to, 3 figures to being able to sell a magic painting potentially for 5.
Yeah,
And that's,
the Yorion did very well from what I read on Hipsters of the Coast. I mean, congratulations on that.
Thank you. So like that's an aspect that, has changed drastically. Like, and so it's worth keeping even the stuff I don't like to, to sell.
So I was going to say, if you just want to destroy anything, if you have anything that you want to destroy, I'd be like, just mail it to me. I'll be happy to take.
I would never do it now, but I'm glad I did it with that piece. And I don't think the difference though is I think between then and now, like I think it's become a lot clearer in terms of, the art directors at Wizards, like what I'm good at, what I'm, maybe that piece was a little too abstract. Maybe it was a little too out there for me. It didn't feel like a Steve piece, from the get-go. And I fought that the entire time. And, I mean, it happens.
I get, I mean, I get it. It's just, it's interesting to hear. It's interesting to talk to you guys and sort of get the take on it. And yours is it's a very Steve take on it. And I can appreciate your point of view. I will tell you that like you're amazing at what you do, and you really are one of the iconic magic painters. I mean, I'll have to say it's Duress, and they're like, oh my god, I mean, it's really one of those things where the card precedes the actual mechanics. Like I remembered noticing your art as art before I even knew what the cards were. That was the way I saw. That's the way I gauge the ones that I connect to, who I want to talk to. I remember seeing Surgical Extraction and not even giving a crap, and I couldn't even tell you what the card does now. I'm not interested.
I sure can't. So
I'm more taken by the images and the stories. That's just sort of my side. So I can tell you your stuff arrests when you see it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I mean that's. I mean, I played for a brief period of time in college, and then when I graduated college, I always say, my anecdote is basically like I lived in New York City. I could afford art supplies or I could afford Magic.
Right.
And so I went with the logical choice. And it was like, I'm glad that I had the experience playing that I did, because it kind of got me used to the fact that essentially you're making art for something that's essentially what, 2 postage stamps wide. It's a really small, it needs to be iconic, it needs to be iconographic. And so that's always another aspect of problem solving that's always in my head, and some people are definitely better at that than others, and it's something that I struggle with personally, especially weirdly as sizes of pieces have gotten larger. That becomes harder because I end up being so tempted to fill the space with detail and that kind of thing. So
right,
really hard to balance that.
Which pieces do you have of your own that you've kept? I mean, which one which are the ones that you've kept for your own personal collection?
I've kept Surgical Extraction, much to the chagrin of many a collector, and
everybody.
I've flat out told them it's not for sale. It'll never be for sale.
Will it be like donated to some museum, or what will happen to?
Oh, I have no idea. Let's hope that I outlive its usefulness.
Well, I think that that's an interesting way of looking at it. But I meant that as that your artwork will continue to be interesting when you are gone.
I mean, maybe
Oh, it will be. Trust me.
Legacy is not something I've ever been concerned about. Like, I mean, I don't even have any kids, so it's not something that like I've ever really worried about. And people, I try and do my work are in an archival nature so that it'll outlast me and all that stuff. But in all reality, like in my own headspace, like I really, my artwork only has to last long enough for it. If it disintegrates the day after they put me on the ground, like,
oh my gosh, you're the only person,
really morbid, and
you're the only person who feels that way, right? You understand this?
Well, I mean, it's not so much. Look, the image will continue on, as long as magic, I mean, and even if magic, I don't know, trips over itself and fails miserably and is no longer a game in 5 years, right? Wizards of the Coast still owns all those images, and they would find a way to use them down the road anyway. So like, there's, whether I like it or not, there will be a legacy, there will be artwork that will get used and will be a part of people's lives for many years to come, and that's fascinating to me. It's not something that I ever aspired to, and it's not something I ever really even considered. I mean, the idea that anybody wants an autograph is weird to me. Like, I'm just not that guy. Like, I just don't, so like that kind of stuff is never, it's still sinking in weirdly, all these years on. Like, this is still a thing. Like, I wake up, it's still a thing. Like,
that's I guess that's a lot to take in, that you sort of have to embrace the fact that you are a star, regardless of your own. You are. Look, this is in the world of magic artists. This is what I mean, and I'm not saying this to be like a sycophant. I'm just saying this is how it is.
I appreciate it.
It's
but
it's legit.
I mean, it's just weird. I mean, it's fascinating to me that those things will outlive me. But I mean, it's not, I don't know what'll happen to my originals. I don't know, I mean, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, I own that one, and I own Transcendent Master, and I own this piece called Seed Cradle Witch from, I can't remember if that's Lorwyn or Morningtide.
I'll have to look that one up because I'm not familiar with that one.
I mean, that's not like a super, high value card or anything. It was just one of those, like, oh, I painted a pretty elf and I'm happy with it. Like, gotta keep it,
Right. Well, I mean, again, Duress is not what you would call a high value card. I mean, it's a sale. It goes for 35 cents, but it's the image I'm using for the the thumbnail on this video. So
So, I mean, I'm trying to think. I probably have a couple more that I can't think of off the top of my head at the moment, because I don't, this is really strange. I don't have any art on my walls.
that is, I noticed that. I was like, but you know what? That makes sense, because it's sort of like a musician doesn't want to listen to music when they're writing a song, because you'll sort of just start to take in whatever it is that is around you. And I'd imagine the same goes
Weird.
with painting.
Actually, I think most artists I know like to have a lot of imagery up, or, you know, like to have their influences up and that kind of thing. And I normally will have, you know, like my, you know, illustration hero, like images of my illustration heroes, like hanging up when, you know, like, but they're not, you know, they're not even prints. They're just like, oh, this is, you know, the, you know, NC Wyeth calendar, or, you know, Norman Rockwell calendar or whatever. But, you know, the reality is that, you know, one, this was a rental house before it was a house I owned. So like, I'm so programmed to not bother putting anything up on the wall, because I'm only
This
have
is
to
going to
turn
take
around
it out of
and,
your
like,
deposit.
yeah. And two, like I've moved a lot. Actually, it's not fair to say. I mean, we've lived here for 7 years, but before that, I moved a lot, and so my artwork's always packed away. I never even bothered to unpack it, because like I knew we were going to relocate, you know, in a year or two, you know. So I never actually bothered to pull it, and so it just continued, and so like I have all this artwork that I really should hang up, but I just never have. And there's always in the back of my mind too, because I live in Seattle, you know, like I'll hang everything up, and then the next day there will be an earthquake and all of the paintings get damaged.
Oh,
So like
such
there's that in
anxiety.
the back of my head, you
Such
know.
anxiety.
So yeah, and I have some pieces from other artists that I really, really love and adore, that I don't want anything to happen to. So, you know, you know, yeah, I could put insurance on it, but, you know, cash isn't a good replacement for
No,
the
but
artwork.
you could get a vault somewhere. Don't they have like airtight vaults and stuff like that?
I'm sure. I don't know where I'd put it, but, you know.
Well,
Yeah.
the last thing I'll ask you, whatever, is there anything that you can talk about that is upcoming with Wizards that you're allowed to talk about? I'm guessing that maybe you might be involved with a return to a certain plane that you were talking about earlier. It starts with I. I know you can't talk about stuff, but
Yeah.
is there anything that you can talk about?
Spoiler alert. Yeah, I haven't been on a concept push team in a very, very long time. So I have like zero insight into anything. Other artists that, it's really weird. I don't have I'm not steeped in Magic the way that a lot of people who work on Magic are. And a lot of my fellow artists are far more aware of what sets are coming and what sets are going, and, you know, what's being worked on behind the scenes than I do. It's always a surprise to me. Like, it's just like, here's an assignment, here's a new star god. I'm like, oh, we're going back here. All right. So like I'm actually legitimately not informed at all as to what's coming out. And the only thing I can say is like, you know, I know that whatever the world is, like Kaldheim or something like that, that's coming
Yep.
out, you know. I did a piece that
You've been spoiled.
was just spoiled yesterday.
Yeah. I noticed that.
Yeah,
I was like, that's exciting. I mean, there you are. It's like you are one of the the early spoils. I saw that. I was like, this is poignant. And I happened to do an opening of Scars of Mirrodin, and I had not seen a lot of your work, and I saw so much of it. I was just like, wow, this is kismet. I'm just like, all right, I'm happy.
yeah. And that was the piece that just got spoiled, which I don't know what it's called. It's like the Duel of the Skilled or something like that.
I'm blanking, but it is a saga. It's a saga.
Yeah, it's a saga painting, and it's one of the weirdest paintings I've ever done for Magic. Like, you know, I mean, the two previous sagas I did were of basically, you know, what do you call it? Tapestries. And this one is like sort of a leather frontispiece that's, you know, but it's a really super design oriented, you know, aesthetic for me. And it's pretty unusual, which was kind of a nice escape.
That's
yeah.
Yeah, unusual is a good way to, if you're saying unusual, that's
yeah.
positive.
No, I mean it's kind of nice to get to step out of your own aesthetic sometimes, or be forced to. So it's actually, it was a good time. It was a good exploration, honestly.
Well, I thank you so much for your time. This has been a great conversation, and I look forward to everything you do in the future. And I know that everybody else does too. I'm literally speaking on behalf of the Magic community, because this is, I mean, they're my peoples. So
Oh, thank you. Well, either way, I mean, I'm still going strong. Yes, hopefully that doesn't change anytime soon. I like the work. It's fun. I mean, it takes me, it forces me to do stuff I would never assign myself, which, has a lot of value inherent to it. So that's kind of fun. And
yeah,
I mean, that there's a community behind it, that there are, it's probably the best part about the job. Like, yeah, it's a living and it's working on this, very high profile game, but I've always been tickled to meet folks in person, and someday I hope to be able to do that again, because
right.
man,
That used to be a thing.
yeah, I mean, getting back to being able to actually see people and who play the game and give a hoot about it, that would be swell, honestly. So
Yeah, Magic's tough
hopefully we
without
can
the
all get back
gathering.
to that.
I agree. I agree.
Indeed. So
Well, thank you again, and just have a great day, and keep on keeping on the good work.
thanks, man. I appreciate it. Take
All
care.
right. Talk to you later.
Definitely. Cheers.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and I'm going to announce this week's winner of the giveaway. It will be Silas Jude, and Silas Jude will be winning the Phyrexian Hydra foil that I just opened for my Mirrodin Besieged, which you can watch and like and comment and hopefully subscribe. And that brings me back to you, by the way, if you do want to be entered to win in the weekly giveaway, you must not just subscribe, but comment so I can see your name, so that way I know who I am actually going to be sending the cards to. So that's all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, I gots to scoop.